What you're witnessing right now is not a travel story. It's a window into how war reshapes the entire architecture of the modern world. And most Americans are not paying close enough attention to what is unfolding in real time across the Persian Gulf. When British tourists start canceling Easter vacations to Dubai, a city that was just weeks ago the symbol of Gulf prosperity and global ambition, you need to stop and ask yourself a serious question. What has actually changed? The answer is everything. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched surprise airstrikes on multiple sites and cities across Iran, killing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and numerous other Iranian officials. That single event did not just set a country on fire, it set a region on fire. It sent shockwaves through aviation, through global shipping lanes, through energy markets, and yes, through the vacation plans of ordinary families in Birmingham and Bristol who had been dreaming of Dubai's skyline. But here is what I want you to understand before we go any deeper. This is not about tourists. This is about power. This is about the collapse of a regional order that Washington spent decades building. And right now, while most Americans are focused on domestic noise, the Middle East is being completely reorganized, and the United States is the one holding the match. Let's go back to the beginning, because context is everything in this business. Just before the strikes began, on February 27th, Oman's foreign minister Badr al-Busaidi said a breakthrough had been reached, and Iran had agreed both to never stockpile enriched uranium and a full verification by the International Atomic Energy Agency. He said peace was within reach. Talks were expected to resume on March 2nd. Think about that for a moment. A negotiated solution was on the table. A genuine diplomatic off-ramp existed. Iran had made real concessions, according to the mediator, and then within 24 hours, bombs fell on Tehran. After the U.S. and Israel attacked Iran, al-Busaidi said that he was dismayed and that active and serious negotiations had been undermined. The Omani foreign minister, one of the most careful, quiet diplomats in the entire region, publicly expressed dismay. That is a significant statement from a country that rarely raises its voice, and it tells you something important. This war was a choice, not a necessity. Now, I am not here to debate the morality of that choice this moment. What I am here to do is give you an honest picture of what that choice has produced and what it will continue to produce for months, possibly years ahead. Unlike the June 2025 strikes, which President Trump said curbed Iran's nuclear capabilities, the current conflict has spread across at least a dozen countries, closed the Strait of Hormuz, the world's major oil artery, and killed more than 2,300 people in the region. The Strait of Hormuz, let that land. Roughly 20% of the world's oil flows through that narrow passage every single day. Major container shipping companies, including Maersk, CMA CGM, and Hapag-Lloyd, suspended transits through the strait and related routes. Houthi-controlled Yemen announced that it would resume attacks on Israel and commercial ships in the Red Sea, forcing Suez Canal traffic to be rerouted around Africa's Cape of Good Hope, adding weeks to transit times and increasing shipping costs dramatically. Think about what that means for the American consumer. Think about what it means for the price of everything that moves by ship, which is nearly everything you buy. The war is not over there. The war's economic consequences are already here, and they will grow worse before they get better. Now let's talk about Dubai, because this is where the tourism story becomes genuinely instructive. Dubai was not a bystander in this conflict. Since the war began, the UAE has reported facing hundreds of ballistic missiles, 15 cruise missiles, and over 2,500 drones launched by Iran. Authorities report that of these, over 90% have been intercepted, and most of the damage has been material, 90% intercepted. That is an impressive number from a military standpoint. But here is the reality. Even a 10% penetration rate when you are talking about hundreds of missiles and thousands of drones means real damage, real fear, and a complete evaporation of tourist confidence. You cannot market a luxury vacation destination while debris from intercepted missiles is raining down on hotels. Industry estimates suggest the region is currently losing around $600 million a day in international visitor spending as travelers cancel holidays or delay trips due to safety fears and flight disruptions. $600 million every single day. And that number does not include the broader economic disruption from energy markets, shipping rerouting, and the longer-term reputational damage to Gulf tourism infrastructure that took decades to build. Economists estimate that inbound arrivals to the Middle East could decline 11 to 27% year on year in 2026 due to the conflict. compared to a December forecast that projected 13% growth. In absolute terms, this would mean between 23 and 38 million fewer international visitors compared to the previous forecast, and between $34 and $56 billion in lost visitor spending. These are staggering figures, and they represent something far more consequential than a bad quarter for hotel chains. They represent the unraveling of the Gulf states' strategic pivot, their decade-long effort to diversify away from oil dependency by building world-class tourism economies. Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Doha, these cities poured enormous national wealth into becoming global hubs, not just for leisure, but for finance, aviation, and geopolitical influence. That project is now under direct threat. Dr. Naeem Madad, founder and CEO of Gates Hospitality, said cancellations are coming in all the way until May, adding that when the first quarter starts badly, the rest of the year becomes a race to catch up. That is the voice of a man watching years of investment come under serious threat, not in some abstract financial sense, but in the day-to-day reality of empty hotel lobbies and grounded aircraft. Iran's counterattacks have targeted not just Israel, but also the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Jordan, and Lebanon, among others. The attacks have instigated not just flight restrictions, but closures of swaths of airspace. When airspace closes across that many countries simultaneously, the entire global aviation network has to be reorganized in real time. Flights between Europe and Asia that routinely passed over this region now have to fly around it. Over 23,000 flights were canceled in the immediate aftermath of the conflict. 23,000. That number dwarfs what we saw during many previous regional crises. And every one of those cancellations represents a stranded passenger, a disrupted business deal, a broken family vacation, a financial loss cascading through dozens of industries simultaneously. British holidaymakers told the BBC they are stranded overseas after their flights were canceled when the U.S.-Israeli war with Iran erupted. One couple from West Sussex were due to fly home, but were informed that alternative flights were fully booked. The husband said, "They all passed the buck. We were essentially homeless." Now, I want you to hold that image in your mind for a moment. An ordinary British couple stranded on holiday, scrambling for money from family members, trying to figure out whether a connecting flight through a war zone is safe. That is the human face of what happens when strategic decisions are made in Washington and Tel Aviv without a clear exit strategy, without a defined termination mechanism, and without sufficient regard for the cascading consequences on civilian life across the entire region and beyond. The Iranian regime perceives that it is in an existential conflict, and it does not appear to be interested in an immediate off-ramp. From Iran's perspective, a cessation of hostilities would merely be a temporary respite. A slow, protracted war of attrition is probably Iran's intended outcome. Iranian leaders are calculating that their country is more willing to take casualties and absorb pain than either the United States or Gulf countries. This is the strategic reality that Washington needs to grapple with honestly. Iran is not simply going to fold. Iran has been preparing for this moment in various forms for over 2 decades. They watched what happened to Iraq. They watched what happened to Libya. They watched what happened to every country that gave up its deterrence capability and then faced regime change from outside. Iran entered this fight with that history in mind, and they are prepared for a long, grinding conflict. Iran entered 2026 with 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity, enough if further enriched for as many as 10 nuclear weapons. The nuclear dimension does not disappear just because facilities have been bombed. Knowledge cannot be destroyed from the air, and any successor government in Tehran, whatever its political character, will inherit a strategic environment in which the case for nuclear deterrence has been dramatically strengthened, not weakened, by this campaign. Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, accused the United States of having used its nuclear talks with Iran as cover before military operations. Whether you agree with that characterization or not, it is the message that every nation on Earth that does not currently possess nuclear weapons received loud and clearly on February 28th. If you negotiate, if you show flexibility, if you move toward a deal, you may still get bombed. That lesson will shape proliferation decisions for a generation. This is the kind of second-order consequence that gets lost in the daily drumbeat of military updates and flight cancellations. But it is arguably the most important consequence of all. Iran's counterstrikes on Arab Gulf states in 2026, who have sought to deepen relations with Iran in recent years, may also leave it further isolated. The attacks also follow the failure of indirect negotiations in February on a new agreement to curtail Iran's nuclear program. The Gulf states are in an extraordinarily difficult position right now. Anger has surfaced in Gulf states caught up in the conflict as Iran launches retaliatory missile strikes against U.S. military assets hosted on their soil. Saudi Arabia condemned in the strongest terms the Iranian attacks on Gulf Arab states and warned of dire consequences, while also calling on all parties to end the spiral of violence, which it stressed started with U.S.-Israeli attacks on Iran. Read that carefully. Saudi Arabia is simultaneously condemning Iranian missiles landing on its neighbors and acknowledging that the United States started this chain of events. These governments are trying to walk an impossible line. They house American military assets, they depend on American security guarantees, and yet they are now absorbing Iranian retaliation as a direct result of American military choices they did not fully endorse or request. That is an unsustainable position, and it will have long-term consequences for American influence in the Gulf. Travel executives started off 2026, as they often do, upbeat. Some airline executives, including those at the most profitable U.S. carriers, Delta and United, forecast record earnings within reach this year. The war erupted as the travel industry was leaning on premium options to woo wealthier customers, who make up a greater share of spending overall. The people who make these financial forecasts are not fools. They had good reason for optimism. The global travel industry was in genuine recovery mode, and now they are watching a conflict with no clear end date swallow their projections whole. Putting aside the COVID-19 health crisis that ground most international travel to a halt, one travel analyst called this week the most chaotic event seen, frankly, since 9/11, since September 11th. Let that comparison sit with you for a moment. We are not talking about a localized disruption. We are talking about a structural shock to the global system, to energy, to aviation, to trade, to the psychological sense of security that underpins modern international commerce and travel. On March 15th, an Iranian commander said that Iran would continue to use the Strait of Hormuz as a pressure point. Iran's strategy is becoming clearer by the day. They cannot match American air power. They cannot prevent the destruction of their military infrastructure, but they can make the cost of this war unbearable for the global economy by targeting the arteries through which the world's energy supply flows. Every tanker they hit, every shipping lane they threaten, every percentage point they add to oil prices sends a message not just to Washington, but to every capital on earth. This war has a price, and you will all pay it. The disruption is costing the tourism sector at least $600 million a day in lost international visitor spending, according to the World Travel and Tourism Council, which before the conflict had forecast travelers would spend $207 billion in the region in 2026. That is money that will not come back quickly. Tourism confidence, once shattered, takes years to rebuild. The Gulf states know this. Their diversification strategies, the mega projects, the luxury hotels, the Formula One races, and World Expos were built on the premise of political stability. That premise no longer holds in the way it did 2 months ago. What does all of this mean for ordinary Americans? It means your gas prices will continue to reflect the instability in the strait. It means the goods you order online will cost more to ship and will take longer to arrive. It means the next time you think about flying internationally, more routes will be restricted, more connections will be complicated, and more of the world's most dynamic economic region will be operating under the shadow of active conflict. And it means that the United States is now committed, financially, militarily, and reputationally, to an outcome in Iran that nobody has clearly defined. What does victory look like? What happens the day after the bombs stop falling? The greatest danger may be a prolonged campaign that fails to produce dramatic internal change in Iran and lacks a clearly defined termination mechanism, resulting in an open-ended conflict with no visible conclusion on the horizon. Open-ended conflict, no visible conclusion. Those are the words of serious analysts at serious institutions, and they should concern every American who understands that wars without exit strategies have a way of consuming far more than anyone planned to spend in treasure, in lives, and in the global standing that took generations to build. The British tourists canceling Easter trips to Dubai are not just a data point in a travel industry report. They are a signal. They are the visible human manifestation of a fundamental shift in the global order. a shift driven by military decisions made in Washington this past February, with consequences that will ripple outward for years. The question now is not whether those consequences will arrive. They are already here. The question is whether the people making decisions in this country are prepared to manage what comes next with the honesty, the clarity, and the strategic discipline that the moment demands. History is not gentle with nations that start wars they cannot finish cleanly, and the world is watching very carefully to see whether this one will be different.